A quick disclaimer before we start. To warn you that this is not to be used as a training video, as I'm not an instructor, and at the time of this video I don't even have a pilot's license. Hello and a very warm welcome to the channel. Today's video is about how to join Old Buckingham's runway 25 with a right-hand circuit pattern using Snetterton as a starting reference point. This should hopefully give you a visual understanding of how to join, where to turn base and final, and also includes where to make the radio calls. You join me here, approximately 3 miles south of Snetterton. I have already called up Old Buckenham on the radio to establish which runway is in use and circuit direction, which they have told us it's runway 25 with a right-hand circuit. We are currently at a QNH altitude of 1,400 feet. QNH signifies the atmospheric pressure adjusted to mean sea level. I'm not going to go deeply into altimeters and how they work off atmospheric pressure. I'm just going to tell you, this basically means the current height of the plane is 1,400 feet above the level of the sea. As the land is above sea level, and I know Old Buckengham's Airfield has an elevation above sea level of about 200 feet, and we know the land in this area is fairly flat. We can roughly assume this currently makes us about 1,200 feet above the ground. These figures will all come relevant shortly when we need to be at circuit pattern height of around 1,000 feet and not below 500 feet when turning on to final, as our altimeter will show approximately 200 feet higher than we actually are above the ground. Once I'm above Snetterton, I will contact them again, telling them my intentions on joining their ATZ. We will be joining the ATZ at the start of downwind. From Snetterton, we will track overhead the A11. Because we are on a right-hand circuit pattern for runway 25, this means downwind starts parallel with the start of Attleboro on our right. We will call Old Buckenham Radio when we are at the start of downwind, letting them know where we are and that we are joining their ATZ. Now that we are overhead Breckland Lodge, we are looking for traffic on crosswind that could have just taken off from Old Buckenham and could potentially be staying in the circuit pattern. This means they could also be joining downwind at the same time as us. Just before we arrive at downwind, let's make the joining downwind and entering the ATZ radio call. This is a prime opportunity to do the pre-landing checks. Any of the steps in the pre-landing checklist are double checks to eliminate the possibility of unexpected failure of the aircraft while in the landing process. Okay, so let's get the pre-landing checks done. For this we use the acronym BUMFINCH. Brakes, undercarriage, mixture, fuel, flaps, instruments, carb heat, temperatures and pressures in the green, compass, and directional indicator aligned, ensuring the wings are level before checking the compass. Close carb heat, hatches and harnesses secure. Now that we have a bit of time before turning onto the base leg, let's revisit the pre-landing checks in a little more detail. Actually, before we start that, we need to do the mandatory downwind call because we are now abeam the numbers of Old Buckengham's runway. Let's continue running through the checks. B. Brakes. I'm ensuring that they have resistance when pushing down the brake pedals. Park brake set to off. U. Undercarriage. Wheels are down and locked. The Cessna 152 has fixed non-retractable wheels. M. Mixture. Set as required. Full rich at this altitude. F. Fuel, sufficient amount to land, and go around if required, if not declare a Mayday emergency. F. Flaps, set as required. I. Instruments, alternator not discharging. Suction in the green, compass, and DI aligned, correct QNH set. T. Temperatures and pressures. Open carb heat for 10 seconds. C. Close carb heat. H. Hatches and harnesses. Seatbelt and doors. All fastened and secured. We turn on to base leg when we get to the solar farm, which is just to the right of the road below. You will also see on the other side of the road, and parallel to the solar farm, is Wyndham College. Okay, let's get set up for the landing. So at 2000 RPM or lower, we apply carb heat. So let's do that first by pulling the lever to the left of the throttle. And now we reduce the power to slow the airspeed to within the white arc. The white arc is the safe speed to deploy flaps. Now we apply the second stage of flaps, maintaining an airspeed of 70 knots. We track towards the shiny white-roofed building just above the nose of the plane and aim to get between 500 and 700 feet when overheaded to turn on to base. Remember, we are flying on QNH and not QFE. The QNH setting is actually making the altimeter read 200 feet higher than we actually are above the ground, where if we were flying on QFE, which is airfield elevation, this would mean the altimeter would read 0 when we landed at the airfield. So we need to subtract approximately 200 feet from the altimeter to get the correct height we actually are above the ground. So we need an altimeter reading of between 700 and 900 feet to be at the correct height to turn on to final. While we are completing this last part of the base leg, let's talk a little bit about the runway. It was built as the wartime home of the United States Air Force 453rd Bombardment Group. Even though the whole original runway is not used today, it is mostly still visible. The first part now has trees either side and farm buildings. The second part normally houses 50 feet tall haystacks, and the final part is Old Buckingham's current runway, but only half the width it originally was. Okay, we are now overhead the shiny white roof building, so we now turn onto final. As you can see, our altitude is indicating 800 feet, which, as we discussed before, actually means we are approximately 600 feet above the ground. As we were turning onto final, the final third stage of flaps were added. If there was a significant crosswind, or if it was gusty, we may have landed with less flaps to give the plane better stability, but this isn't required today. We are now aiming for an indicated airspeed of 65 knots. Now that we are set up for final, we give the mandatory final radio call. As there is not a great deal of wind slowing down our ground speed, this means we are heading to the start of the runway quicker in comparison to having a strong headwind. This gives us less time to lose altitude before the runway threshold. To lose altitude faster, we will have to reduce the power and lower the nose slightly to maintain 65 knots. We get a little sink just before the start of the runway, so to stop us landing early, a dash of power is added. There's a runway crossing point at Bravo for vehicles. Ensure you have a good look for vehicles on either side of the runway waiting to cross or have already started crossing. Now that we are safely over the runway threshold, let's set power to idle and raise the nose to keep the plane off the ground. By performing this process, it reduces speed. The Cessna 152 can be a little floaty, so we have to keep flying the plane until the speed is reduced to such an extent that we land gently on the runway. As it's not winter or very wet, the grass section of Old Buckenham is open today, as this is closed during winter and very wet seasons. So you may need to ask if it's open before landing here. As we know it's open, we could have exited the runway here at Bravo, which is close to the halfway point of the runway. But as there is no traffic to affect our backtracking down the runway, this is the option we will take. Don't forget the backtracking radio call. As previous videos got questions about leaving the carb heat on till after landing, I have decided to add the runway vacated checklist to the video. The Cessna 152's pilot's operating handbook states, before landing: 1. Seats, belts, harnesses adjusted and locked. 2. Mixture rich. 3. Carburetor heat on. Apply full heat before closing throttle. After landing: 1. Flaps up. 2. Carburetor heat cold. The runway vacated checklist is: 1. Runway vacated radio call. 2. Carb heat off. 3. Flaps select up. 4. Transponder set to off. 5. Landing light and pitot heat off. 6. Trim set to neutral. We continue taxiing down taxiway Bravo to park in the general aviation parking. As we can now see on our right, the fuel truck. This is where you would get fuel. If you will require fuel, I would get more information about it when applying for PPR, which is the prior permission required application, as it can be sometimes hard to find someone to fill you up. You could always try asking on the radio on arrival that's if the tower is open on that day. They may be able to find someone to send to you. Currently, the tower is only open on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. At the time of making this video, Thursdays is a new addition to the tower's opening days and may not be listed on all informational sources. To get to the tower, cafe, toilets, or even the Aero Club, you need to head through the gates, which has EGSY written on them that are in front of us now. Once through the gates, it's the building on your right. Here is a picture of what the building looks like. We hope this helps with your arrival to Old Buckenham Airfield and you enjoy your visit. If you liked the video, then help us by hitting the like button, as this tells YouTube that this is good content. Please also subscribe to the channel to be informed when we upload more videos like this. Thank you for watching. We hope to see you all on the next video.